In this video I will adopt a philosophical, Hegelian, and partly Christian perspective on cigarettes, tobacco, and smoking. And the video will be divided into two main parts. I will talk about the logical aspects of cigarettes from a conceptual and a logical standpoint, a metaphysical standpoint with the use of the categories. And in the second part, I will have an encyclopedic overview of the question of cigarettes. Hopefully, if you watch this video to the end, you will stop smoking, you will quit smoking, because if you smoke, you will die. But even if you don't smoke, you will die also eventually. So whatever you do, you will die at some moment. But that's part of life, I guess. Okay, so let us begin with a pack of cigarettes. I illustrate and then first I illustrate and then I comment. That's a cigarette. If I take another cigarette out of the pack, I have two cigarettes. You agree that these are different cigarettes. There's a difference between these cigarettes. This one is not this one, so they are different. Now I take another pack from another brand of cigarettes and I draw out a cigarette, and you will agree probably that these two cigarettes of the same brand, which are different from one another, they are also different from this cigarette, which is a cigarette from a different brand. But the difference between these two cigarettes and this one is different from itself. So that's a different kind of difference. And I will talk about this in logical terms after. I'm just illustrating. Now, I take this. I've read, officially it's a cigarette end or a cigarette stub or cigarette butt in English. So that's what is left after you have smoked the cigarette. So this is different from that. Yeah. Here's a cigar. Take a cigarette and a cigar. They are different, but we somehow unconsciously acknowledge that these are the same kinds of objects. It's very vague, kind, object. What is a kind? What is an object? But they are like the same. It's made to smoke, to inhale tobacco, and yeah. Now I have a cigarette and a lighter. You acknowledge that these are different objects, but they are not indifferently different. It's not like if I take a cigarette and a glass to drink water, because a cigarette is different from a lighter, but they complement one another. Because if you have a cigarette and no lighter, you're in trouble. Or maybe you're not, because it prevents you from smoking. So maybe that's a good thing. Who knows? And then I have a nice lighter with a couple, seems to love one another. So here we have two different lighters, and the difference between the two is a difference of price. One is more expensive than the other, and with a nice picture, and this one is very classical. So the difference between these two objects is kind of similar to the difference between this cigarette of a given brand and this cigarette of another brand. So this is, for a different kind of objects, we have the same relationship of difference. That's not the end of the story. What is this? That's an electronic cigarette. You insert this, which is can be recharged or recycled, into this, which is the substratum. You insert this here, you press the button, you inhale, and that gives you, I have not tested, but that gives you the equivalent, supposedly, of a cigarette without all the negative chemical elements. So it's a transitory. That's different from this object, but it's similar, but more different than the difference between a cigar and a cigarette. So here we have three kinds of objects which are similar. They seem to be identical, but they are nonetheless different. So that's what kind of identity, what kind of difference lies in the relationship between these three objects. That's a very profound philosophical question. And now, that's not the end of the story. Here we have sublingual tablets with nicotine to prevent, or not to prevent, but to help people who are addicted on tobacco and cigarettes to help them quit smoking. You put that under your tongue, and eventually it might help you quit smoking. So you have this, who might help you quit smoking, and then you have this. And finally, if I find what I'm looking for, which apparently I'm not, we have this, which is a patch, a nicotine patch, that you are supposed to stick on your arm to help you quit smoking. So that's how it works. If you're addicted to cigarettes, you stick that on your skin, and supposedly it will help you quit smoking. And you will probably agree, without having studied the depth of German metaphysics, that this patch and this cigarette, they are different, but in a different kind of difference. They are opposed. The lighter and the cigarette are complementary. The tablet, sublingual tablet, or the patch to help you quit smoking, they are opposed. And these kind of differences are moments of the development of logical categories. So now that I have made the illustrative part, I will talk in logical terms. Okay. If I find, my notes. Okay. So let us go back to the start. The cigarette. What is this in philosophical language? That's an object. No, that's too determined. That's something. This is something. When we say something, we qualify. Say that to qualify something, in the language of Hegel, quality is one with being. What is it? It is to say what is means to qualify, to give determinations. This is something. That's a very poor determination. The quality, we call this a cigarette. But it also has a quantity. It has a certain size, a certain width and breadth. So the quality and the quantity are one. And the illustration of this, if I find what I'm looking for, you can change the quantity of the cigarette. It doesn't cease to be what it is. If I cut this part, it's shorter. It has lost a part of its quantity, but that's still a cigarette. And I will not light it up and smoke, because maybe I'm afraid to die if I smoke. That would be comical. But you understand that you can change the quantity when you smoke, and the cigarette doesn't cease to be what it is. But Hegel says quality and quantity are one. So you can reduce the quantity of a cigarette, but there comes a moment, which is a qualitative step, where the cigarette ceases to be a cigarette if you change the quantity, and it becomes a cigarette end. It's no longer a cigarette. It has changed the quality. A cigarette and a cigarette stub or cigarette end are different things, right? Because one is the loss of measure of the other. That's a logical determination. And when you light up a cigarette, you can expect the cigarette to last a certain amount of time. You can inhale, I don't know how many times, but a few dozens of times, cigarettes, and the more you inhale, the more the size is being reduced. And so you can smoke usually for a few minutes to smoke a cigarette. So that's a quantitative determination. Yeah, and once you have finished your cigarette, it remains the remnants, the ashes, the cigarette end, the cigarette butt. And I will talk in the encyclopedic moment, what do we do with this trash? How do we recycle, or what do we do with this, with the remnant? That's a question which finds a place in the encyclopedic view about civic society, law, civility, politeness, social interaction, etc., etc. So, yeah. But now, the question is the question of identity and difference. But we are not, identity and difference are determinations of the essence in the philosophy of Hegel. And here I have two cigarettes of the same brand. What is the difference in philosophical term? That's a quantitative difference. And Hegel says that continuity and discretion, what is continuous and what is discrete in mathematics, continuity means unity, and discretion means also unity but separation. And to translate this, Hegel would say that a pack of cigarettes here with 17 or 16 cigarettes in it, the continuity would be the cigarette, the idea of cigarette, cigaretteness, cigarettehood, whatever. But it's continuous in the sense that, here I talk like Plato, not like Hegel, but the idea of the cigarette is present in each individual cigarette, but at the same time, this continuity is broken in a way, because these are discrete units. There are 17 or 16, whatever, cigarettes in this pack of cigarettes. So we have continuity. Each cigarette is a cigarette, and each is different from the others, although we cannot strictly speak of a difference. It's discrete. That's a discrete distinction. Yeah. And now, the cigar. What is the difference between a cigarette and a cigar? The difference is qualitative. It's not the same stuff. It's not made of the same stuff. The chemical composition is different. The tobacco doesn't come from the same place. It's structured differently, etc., etc. But this qualitative difference in terms of chemistry and then also economics and so on is translated into economic terms, namely that this cigarette has cost me a lot less than this cigar. The cigar costs, I don't know how much exactly, but the qualitative difference is reflected in a quantitative difference, namely price. So that's the idea that quality and quantity are united. And there are different quantitative differences of cigars that would be called measured. There are low-priced, first-price cigars, and then there are very expensive cigars. And the more you change the quantity, you change the quality, you change the measure. A cigar which costs $3 is not the same than a cigar which costs $20 or $100 or whatever. So yeah, that's just to illustrate. And to come back to metaphysical questions, these are two cigarettes of the same brand. Leibniz asked himself, are there two things which are exactly identical? And that's a question that modern physicists can ask themselves. Is an electron different from another electron in the quantum fluctuation void where particles appear and disappear? What is the difference between two electrons? What kind of difference is there between two identical particles? That's a metaphysical question. And the answer by Hegel and by Leibniz is what they call Verschiedenheit, namely diversity or distinction, the fact that they are distinct or distinguished. And the illustration that we find in Hegel, talking about Leibniz, is that apparently when Leibniz discussed these kind of questions with the aristocracy of whatever nobility court in whatever German castle, there were ladies, that's the official story, who wandered in the garden and picking up tree leaves, to find if they could find two identical tree leaves to prove or disprove the metaphysical hypothesis of Leibniz, namely that two things are distinct, no matter how similar they might be. And you can check as much as you want if there are two cigarettes who are purely identical. They are not, because from a physical standpoint, they do not contain the same number of molecules and atoms. They do not weight strictly exactly the same weight, although it seems similar and we cannot distinguish the difference. And even if we measure them with a weight scale, but the difference is so tiny, but it exists. And even if they were made of exactly the same number of atoms, which is strictly impossible because it's too complex, the difference would still remain Verschiedenheit, distinction, namely the fact that they are two. Yeah. Okay. So now Hegel says identity is relation to self. When people when they ask, who are you? I am, you give your name. I am myself. And when I say I am myself, this is self-consciousness. And self-consciousness is relation of self to itself. So in the very notion of self-consciousness, there's always already difference, because I think about myself. I can distinguish myself from myself and reflect upon myself. That's what I am self-conscious. Animals are not self-conscious, and young babies and degenerative adults or people with mental problems, degenerative brain problems, or very old senile people, they are not self-conscious either. It requires to say I, to have a sense of I, of self, of ego, in order to be self-conscious. And this is relation to self. And then when identity seeks itself, people are looking for a sense of identity in their political party, the political party they identify with, their ethnic group, their culture, their country, their civilization, the whole of mankind. We say, my identity is the whole of mankind. Yeah, but you are not, as an individual, you are not the whole of mankind. So you identify with what is different. And you say, this difference is my identity. So this is just to explain that in the view of Hegel, identity and difference cannot be differentiated. Or maybe they can, but they must be re-identified and re-established after. Yeah. And yeah. So, to illustrate the lighter and the cigarette, they are different, but they complement one another. One could say that one is the positive and the other is the negative, and positive and negative are moments of difference, but in a positive unity, in a sense that for the people who smokes, to have a lighter and a cigarette is a harmonious unity, because you can smoke. So that's a good thing. It's balanced. It's, if you have just one without the other, if you have just the lighter, you can burn yourself. If you have just the cigarette, maybe you can ask a lighter to someone, but yeah, if you are a smoker, that's problematic. But then Hegel says that in the logical development, there comes a different kind of difference, which is not quantitative, which is not qualitative, which is not complementary or difference, but what he calls real difference is opposition. And opposition, in the view of Hegel, is a difference in which the two opposed determinations are in a unity. One is oneself to the extent that it is not the other, but because it is determined in relation to the other, it has its own identity in the other. That's why the opposites are in a unity from a conceptual standpoint. And here, the opposition in a realm of cigarettes is these patch to quit smoking, or these sublingual tablets. And here again, we find the same, that these two medical drugs, in a sense, they are identical in the sense that both can be categorized as pills or medicine to help you quit smoking, but they are different. It's a different brand, different type of mode of administration, so to speak, but they are identical in a sense that they resemble one another, in the sense that a cigarette and a cigar resemble one another. And here we have the complete opposition. You can choose what you smoke, and you can choose what to take to stop smoking, to quit smoking. But that's really profound, because in the historical development of civilization, but it's just a reflection of a logical development, is that the rise of cigarettes has brought the rise of anti-tobacco medicine. One cannot exist without the other, and they are in a conflict with one another, and every smoker is conflicted between smoking and trying to quit smoking. And the opposites are in a unity. And I will explain why in the encyclopedic view, but that's just the illustration that cigarettes gives rise to electronic cigarette, which is kind of a transitory moment, a transitory step. It's a qualitatively different object, but it's kind of in the transition. So you have the cigarette, the electronic cigarettes, and the anti-smoking medicine. This is a logical development, which is also an economic, historical, but here I remain in the realm of logic. I will illustrate then the encyclopedic view. So yeah, the opposition reaches its pinnacle when a cigarette is opposed to a medicine which helps you smoke. And the way of negating this opposition is to say, I don't need cigarettes. And if I don't need cigarettes, I don't need this either. I don't need neither one nor the other. And you can that's liberating. If you don't need cigarettes, you don't. If you don't need cigarettes, you don't need this either. You don't need both. You are free. You will still have. If you have smoked for a long time, you may still have lung cancer and yellow teeth and bad skin and breathing problems. But at least you will be free spiritually. I'm sorry. Yeah. So that was the logical aspect for probably 21 minutes. Now I will briefly talk about first. No, I will conclude. But I have only talked about determinations from the sphere of being in the Wissenschaft Logik and the sphere of essence. But if we really wanted to say what is a cigarette, we would have to use the determinations of the concept and to grasp the concept of a cigarette. And then we would say that there are particular types, particular brands of the universal idea of cigarette, and each cigarette is a singular cigarette, etc., etc. We would have to use the determinations of the concept, and then the purpose, what is the end goal, why do we smoke for, why do we, also the cause, why do we need to smoke, and what is the end goal, etc. But I will not develop this much longer. I just wanted to illustrate the notion of difference. Okay, now I will adopt an encyclopedic view, and you can watch in the description below the structure of the encyclopedia. I follow the logical structure of an encyclopedia. So we have broadly viewed the logical aspect of cigarettes and tobacco. Now, in the view of Hegel, the world is a manifestation of logic, and I will very briefly, but go through the full spectrum of the encyclopedia on the question of tobacco and cigarettes and smoking. So if you want to know what a cigarette is, first you have to adopt a physical and chemical standpoint, namely what are the physical properties of this thing, this object, and the physical properties of tobacco, the chemicals which are included. Namely, these are molecules made of atoms, a certain structure of atoms, and here in this pack of cigarette, it is said that the smoke of tobacco contains more than 70 substances, which are chemical determinations, which can cause cancer. So the pack of cigarette already informs you about the chemical composition. So physics, chemistry, yeah. Then we have biology, and I will unite biology with anthropology. Biology is the realm of organic life, and anthropology of human life. And if we want to understand cigarettes and tobacco, we have to understand the biological determinations of tobacco leaves. What kind of climate does it grow in? What are the biological determinations of tobacco leaves? Yeah, and also from a human perspective, how does the smoking of tobacco affects the body, the lungs, the teeth, the skin, and that's a question of medicine. How to prevent humans from being poisoned by smoking tobacco? How to reduce eventually the quantity or the amount, which are quantitative and determinations of measure and quantity and quality also. Tobacco, from an encyclopedic standpoint, there is the physical and chemical properties. Then there are the biological properties of tobacco itself, and why it grows mostly in South America, and historically at least, and the determinations of anthropology. How does the human body react to the inhalation, the fact of inhaling tobacco? How does it affect in terms of medicine? And tremendous amount of, I will go to this later, but tremendous amount of money are spent in the developed country to try to fight against cancer by making studies and research, etc., etc. Then, in the realm of anthropology still, but in unity with psychology, so it's more developed, more concrete, we can ask ourselves questions such as, why do humans smoke? Why do they need to smoke? And here we can broadly use chemical determinations to explain this. That's the anthropological part, namely to explain what the inhalation of tobacco makes from a chemical standpoint to our brain. It releases tension, stress. It helps those who smoke feel good, or at least have the illusion that they feel good. So it has chemical, there are chemical reasons for why people enjoy smoking, those who do. And those who don't, because the taste is disgusting, the smell can be repulsive. So these are chemical, but also anthropological reasons. And in the realm of psychology, which is in the continuity of anthropology, the question of why do people smoke, there can be, broadly speaking, the idea that the young want to imitate the adults, the teenagers want to rebel, and they think that it's cool to smoke. Oh, I will assert my teenage freedom and I will smoke cigarettes to look like an adult. That's kind of dumb, but when you're a teenager, you're kind of dumb. Or, in another realm, cigars, the successful businessmen, they have also the psychology of teenagers. They want to imitate mafia boss in mob movies, in a movie about the mobs. They want to be like Tony Montana or whatever. They want to give themselves a sense of prestige. I will smoke cigars to look good, to look like a gangster, and so on and so on. These are psychological determinations. So smoking can be purely chemical, but also psychological and eventually sociological to give yourself a good image. And the advertisers know this. In the 1920s, there were campaigns of advertisement to associate the idea of smoking for women with the idea of liberation. That's great manipulation. So, yeah. Now, this was the realm of subjective spirit, anthropology, psychology. Now we enter the realm of objective spirit, which is the realm of human institutions. From the point of view of law, of legislation, I will talk very briefly. In the Western countries, as far as I know, there are many attempts to try not to outlaw smoking, because this would create psychological reaction and political unrest, but to try to make propaganda to prevent people from smoking by making pictures on the packets of on the cigarette packs to try to show them, look, if you smoke, your teeth will degrade, your skin, your lungs, you will lose your fertility, you may risk heart attacks, you may be handicapped. So the government, at least in some countries, finance this propaganda for the good of those who are dependent on smoking, to say don't smoke, because if you do, you will suffer. So yeah, and here is the great irony, is that on this pack of cigarettes, which says smoking reduces fertility, and we have the picture of a sad couple holding together with the idea that they are smokers and they won't be able to have children. And the great irony is that on this lighter you have the image of a loving couple. So yeah, okay. And now an anecdote. Historically, the National Socialist regime in Germany tried to outlaw smoking, to make smoking and cigarettes forbidden, or at least very restricted. So I will not comment on that. Yeah. Okay, then in the realm of morality, that's the logical development of Hegel. The question of cigarettes brings about the question of morality. And here I will use the determinations of positive and negative, which are logical determinations that we find in the realm of physics with positive and negative electricity, but in the realm of morality, positive and negative is what we call good and bad, or good and evil. And I will talk about the question of freedom, dependence, addiction, and torment eventually. So the question is, are you free to smoke? The first answer is yes, and you can assert your freedom by smoking. We are in the West in free countries. You can go to the tobacco store and buy a pack of cigarettes and smoke. That's what people consider freedom. And the teenagers, when they start smoking, they want to assert their freedom. I am now a teenager, I'm 16 or 17 or whatever. I want to assert my freedom. I want to smoke. But then you become dependent, maybe. And if you are dependent on cigarettes, if you are addicted to tobacco, are you free? That's a good question. Someone who is a smoker, a regular smoker, is he free when he smokes cigarettes? That's a philosophical question. Is he, how should I put it, is this his will who manifests in the fact of smoking, or his lack of will, namely the chemical reactions within his brain making him dependent? That's a good question. And the struggle for someone who wants to quit smoking is a struggle between cigarettes and anti-tobacco patches. But the anti-tobacco patches, they are just chemicals, so they can help, but eventually it has to be an act of the will, which is a mental determination. The will has to find within itself the strength to quit smoking, not the chemicals, because if it's chemical against chemical, we're in the realm of nature, not in the realm of spirit. And chemicals can help quit smoking, so you can fight chemicals with chemicals, but eventually it has to be an act of the will, an inner self-determination to say, I will stop smoking, because I want to assert my freedom by leaving aside cigarettes. Yeah. And then the notion of torment. Those who smoke are tormented chemically, first, by the negative effects of tobacco, financially, because it costs a lot of money, but also they are tormented by the constant anti-tobacco propaganda, showing them images of if you smoke, you will have heart problems, lung problems, your teeth will decay, whatever, your skin will, etc., etc. But also sometimes by the anti-tobacco activist, or they are tormented by the fact that some people do not want to be to live or to sit next to people who smoke because of the smell, or because in restaurant in some countries it is forbidden or it has become outlawed to smoke in restaurants. So the smokers are kind of excluded. They have to find a place for themselves to smoke apart from all the others. So they are constantly tormented, partly either by their own conscience, their feeling of dependence, I am too weak to quit smoking, etc., or by the anti-tobacco activist, or by the propaganda, etc., etc. And then we talk in the realm of morality about good and bad, positive and negative. For the person who smokes, smoking is good. It makes him feel good, or her feel good, because it releases the tension, the stress, etc., etc. And in the view of a smoker, the bad persons are the state, in the countries where the state imposes prices onto tobacco by making high taxes. And one way of fighting against tobacco dependence is to increase the price. And in France, for instance, the huge proportion of the price of a pack of cigarettes is made by taxes imposed by the state. And one way of trying to prevent the cigarette smokers from smoking is by showing them images of, if you smoke, your lungs and your lungs will look like this. They will be rotten and decaying, and your teeth, etc., etc. So that's one way. But another, which may be more convincing, is, okay, we will increase the prices. It's $10. Okay, now it's $12. Or no, tomorrow it will be $15. Someday you will quit smoking because smoking is bad. So in the view of the smoker, the government, which imposes high prices and taxes onto cigarettes, is bad, and a government who would forbid and restrict cigarettes would be considered tyrannical, like in the Great Depression with alcohol in the US. But from the perspective of the government, trying to prevent people from smoking is good. And smoking is bad because it's an addiction. So you have the two opposite points of view. Okay, now in the realm of Sittlichkeit, which is still objective spirit, what we would call today economics, sociology, and history. Tobacco and cigarettes from an economic standpoint. That's a very profitable business. Tobacco companies make an enormous amount of money. And those who sell tobacco, they make money by selling tobacco. So it's an entire network of economic, creating jobs, innovation. This, for instance, it stimulates the energy and the intelligence of engineers. The guy who designed this was very smart, probably. So we can associate morality and economics, saying that tobacco is altogether bad, it should be abolished, like the National Socialists tried to, but then the National Socialists were bad. We should abolish. One view said we should abolish tobacco altogether by should be forbidden, restricted. But then the entire economic network would vanish, and thousands and tens of thousands of jobs and GDP points, a few percentages of GDP points would be lost. So that's the moral dilemma that humans and societies are confronted. Should we allow negative desires to be fulfilled, knowing that the negativity of the consumers, not only of cigarettes but of all sorts of products, is what gives economic growth? That's an economic debate with Mondeville, with the fable of bees, and 19th century economists who said that the economists do not care whether you buy poison to help people or to poison them, as long as you spend your money to buy poison, it makes the economy grow. So these are kind of moral and economic reasoning and questions that people ask themselves. And then, still in the realm of Sittlichkeit, we have, in the realm of sociology or politics, one could say public health, because smoking is a public health issue in developed countries. Cancer, lung cancer, is one of the main causes of death in developed societies because of cigarettes, and also in societies where health is socialized. It costs a tremendous amount of money to heal and cure and take care of patients who suffer from lung cancer because they have smoked all their life. So it costs a tremendous amount of money to society, to the taxpayer, to the worker. And this is a moral dilemma. Should we should we finance public health to prevent people from smoking and to cure people once they have become addicted and eventually sick because of their addiction to smoking? These are moral, political, economic questions. Yeah. And then the history, because politics eventually produces history. If one wants to understand cigarettes and tobacco, one has to understand the historical process which brought tobacco to Europe and to America and to the world at large, and then it has to be contextualized with the conquest of South America by Spaniards and Portuguese, and the discovery of tobacco and the trade and etc. etc. So the historical aspect has to be considered with all the other aspects, and that's only this method of knowledge that might enable one to understand cigarettes. And one might say at this moment, but I don't want to understand cigarettes. I just want to smoke. I don't care about your philosophical explanation. I just want my cigarette. Yeah. I said at the beginning of the video, smoking kills eventually. So if you smoke, you will die. So you shouldn't. Okay. Then we enter the realm of absolute spirit, art, religion, and philosophy. And I know that there's a rock band, not a rock band, a music band named Cigarettes After Sex. I have not listened to their songs, but you can pick one song. Probably there's one referring to cigarettes somehow. And then I will adopt a religious perspective by quoting the Bible. One could imagine God saying, the cigarette which is in the tobacco shop, that's Genesis 3. The cigarette which is in the tobacco shop, God says, you shall not smoke it, neither touch it or buy it, lest ye die. That would be a modern version of God's warning, that if you smoke cigarettes, you will die. That may be one way of God communicating in the modern day and age his warnings to humans. And then in 14, 15, 16 paragraph of Genesis 3, one could imagine that because you have smoked, you will be cursed, you will have heart problems, lung problems, your teeth will decay, your skin will decay, you will smell tobacco, people will reject you, you will have struggles to maintain a healthy respiration when you do sports, you will be exhausted earlier. So if you start smoking, you will be punished eventually. And I warned you, could say God. I warned you that if you start smoking, there are consequences. So, yeah. But maybe there's redemption. First, through nicotine patches, and eventually through finding the will of quitting cigarettes. You cannot restore the health of your lungs, or the whiteness of your teeth, or the clarity of your skin if you have smoked for decades, but you can find inner peace by finding the strength and the will and the character to leave, abandon, aufheben, what has caused you suffering and joy, maybe, if you have found joy or pleasure in smoking, but also probably suffering. And yeah, so this is the religious perspective. And finally, the philosophical perspective, I could say, go back to the start, logic, and then physics, chemistry, biology, anthropology, psychology, law, morality, Sittlichkeit, and art, religion, and philosophy. And this is philosophy. This is the entire process. So that's what I could say about cigarettes in 43 minutes.